tonight's meeting. It's 5:32 on September 28th. We'll call this meeting to order. We'll take a roll call of planning board members. Mike McLeod, Matt Steitzer is present, Bart Riley, Sean Orey, Alice DeShay, Mark Garf, Julie Jackshaw, Josh O'Neill, and Bill Daly. Okay, introduce the planning staff here. We have Dylan Pipnich, planning director, Joella Thomas, planning technician, and Lila Osborne, senior planner. All right, at this time, we'll ask for public comment on items on the agenda. If you plan on commenting on the subdivision, there'll be a time in the future to do that. So if you are planning to comment on any of the economic development districts, this would be a time for that. Okay, so if everyone's here for the subdivision, we'll move on and provide comment on that in a minute. All right, so the first item on tonight's agenda is a preliminary plat of the amended plat of Lot 1AA of the Tippett Minor Subdivision, an application for a 4-lot subsequent minor subdivision located along Hale Columbia Gulch Road. And at this time, we'll take a staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have some slides for the staff report for the amended plat of Lot 1AA of the Tippett Minor Subdivision. This is a subsequent minor subdivision because the parcel itself was created by a subdivision in 2009. The Tippett subdivision made 2 parcels out of 1, and this was the northernmost, and now it's being proposed to be subdivided again, so it's a subsequent minor. The parcel itself is 11.79 acres, and the proposal is for 4 lots. The parcel's already built on, and Lot 1AA3 of the proposal is where the current house is. Here's an aerial image of the lot. This is the zoning, so the parcel's not zoned. The nearest zoning is to the south, which is R1S, single family suburban. The comprehensive plan place type is working lands. To the southeast is open lands. A little bit about the working lands place type. You can see on the map on the right where the working lands are located in the county. These are non-regulatory, so our comprehensive plan outlines future land use goals or projections of what land use now and in the future may look like in these areas. This place type encompasses a lot of the privately held property in Butte-Silver. Typically they're large lots. Land uses tend to be agricultural, silvicultural, cultivating land, ranching, limited resource extraction. Development is typically closely associated with working lands activities, and they're typically in rural areas but served by rural and local road networks and wells and septics on site-by-site basis. Development standards are typically limited. Clustering may be encouraged in limited instances where large lot estate residential development may be considered when served by appropriate infrastructure. And clustering is grouping residential properties in a development to maintain open space. Protection of view sheds and preserving traditional Western characteristics, especially those prominent in Butte-Silver Bow, are especially important in this place type. Here's another image of the plat where you can see the 1, 2, 3, and 4 lots. This northernmost lot has kind of a flag shape so that it maintains frontage on Hale Columbia Gulch Road. Just some pictures of the area. This is looking west at the existing driveway, so there's that house already on the property, and this is the entrance. This is looking north up Hale Columbia Gulch Road. There's some ag land up here you can see. On the very northern edge of the property is an existing driveway which crosses several different properties to get to a house way back here. And this is that driveway / road. It would be named as a part of the subdivision. Here's another view of that road. So this is basically the northern boundary of the lot. This is looking south down Hale Columbia Gulch. And this is just across the street. Gives you an idea of the type of landscape up there. So subdivision has several different review criteria, one of which is effects on agriculture, ag waterways, and water users. The surrounding land use is predominantly low-density residential, interspersed with ag and grazing land. Most of it is classified as forested and grazing land. New development in this subdivision should not hinder access to or productivity of nearby agricultural, grazing, and forested land. There are no new or existing irrigation ditches through the tract, though there's Brown Gulch in the area, and there is another drainage to the west. You can sort of see it on the map. Another review criteria that we look at is effects on local services. The Butte-Silver subdivision regulations require new lots to connect to a public road, water, and sanitary sewer infrastructure when possible. There's no sewer or water infrastructure in this area, so wells and septics are proposed for the new lots, and these would be subject to DEQ review. We wouldn't approve a subdivision that didn't have DEQ's approval that it was safe and healthy. Legal and physical access is provided by Hale Columbia Gulch Road. It's a publicly owned and maintained road. New residents in the area would potentially go to Ramsey Rocker Elementary, East Middle, and Butte High districts, which have not expressed any concern about capacity. Effects on natural environment and wildlife or wildlife habitat. There's no floodplain or drainage on the tract. All disturbed land besides driveways and building sites must be reclaimed and reseeded post-construction. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks has noted that this subdivision is in an area of concern for weeds because there's a known infestation of knapweed. Weed management plans are required of all subdivisions, and they must be approved and bonded for before final plats. Effects on public health and safety. The Butte-Silver Police and Fire District would respond in case of emergency to satisfy the subdivision requirements for rural fire suppression. In-home fire sprinklers are proposed as a deed restriction for future anyone who may potentially build a house in the future. New approaches would be to Hale Columbia Gulch Road, and they would need permits from the Butte-Silver Roads Department. The driveway access road to the north that you can see in this picture will be named, and a stop sign would be installed. It should already technically have a name because it crosses through multiple different properties. That was identified when we started reviewing the subdivision, so that'll be on the plat too. Recommendations and conclusions. The Planning Board makes a recommendation to the Council of Commissioners. The subdivision satisfies zoning and subdivision requirements. There is no zoning in the area. Staff recommends approval of the preliminary plat of the amended plat of Lot 1AA Tippett Minor Subdivision, subject to the conditions outlined in the staff report. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Osborne. All right, at this time, we'll take questions of the planning board to staff. I guess I have a question if you could answer. Excuse me. If this board were to recommend approval to the Council of Commissioners to subdivide this lot of land, does that somehow set precedent for future development? Is that a legal question?
Mr. Chairman, so that's a difficult question to answer. Basically, if you were to recommend approval of this subdivision to the Council of Commissioners, this board would be finding that this subdivision does not adversely impact those listed criteria in your staff report. So the effects on agriculture and the local services, and those are your review criteria. So if this board recommends approval to the council commissioners, any future subdivision would also have to meet that criteria, if that makes sense. So I guess there's not an arbitrary decision here to be made. You have specific criteria that you review, and any subdivision to recommend approval would also have to meet that criteria. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you for the reminder. So our criteria is based on the A, B, C, D through E of the staff report.
Yeah, those sections that she went over in her presentation, you know, the effects on agriculture, the local services, effects on the environment, those are the only reviewable portions of subdivisions. So if you were to find that this proposal does not adversely affect those review criteria, then you would recommend approval, and any future subdivision that you also review, this decision has no bearing on that. The only thing that has bearing on future decisions are those review criteria.
Great, thank you. Any questions from the planning board?
Are there other
Mr.
subdivisions?
Garf?
Thank you. Are there other subdivisions of this size with lots between 3.5 and 2.3 acres in the area?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Garf, there's one small parcel to the northwest. It might be hard to see. Can you see that up there?
Mm-hmm.
That's the smallest one in the area.
And what size is that lot?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I could find out for you.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Garf, generally speaking, the working lands place type, that was in the comprehensive plan that we adopted in 2020. Those are agricultural areas that the residential development is typically ranch land working. They're generally larger tracts of land. The proposal here with 1 to 3 acres is more generally fitting of suburban type place type in our comprehensive plan. If that answers your question.
It does. I have a follow-up. So there's nothing in our current zoning code that would restrict this subdivision, correct? Otherwise, we wouldn't be here talking about it tonight.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Garf, this area is currently unzoned. The zoning code is the regulatory document. Subdivisions have to be in compliance with zoning. However, the comprehensive plan is an element that the planning board can consider in their recommendation. It is typically applied in the effects to agriculture or the effects to local services sections of your review criteria.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. McLeod?
I think she's got something quick.
Ms. Osborne?
Mr. Chairman, that smaller lot is 1.2 acres.
Thank you.
And there is the lot directly south of this parcel is 3.6 acres.
Mr. McLeod?
Mr. Chairman, not to put you or Mr. Pipinich, I'd prefer Mr. Pipinich, putting him on the spot. But in all seriousness, when these issues come before us, I think it helps to let the folks here know what our role is, and specifically, the staff has a report. Whether we make a recommendation to that the council approve it or deny it, we're not the final say. Fair enough. And I don't know if there needs to be more explanation, just the process, just so folks are kind of aware what our role is.
Mr. Pipinich?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. McLeod, this is a subsequent minor subdivision, so that is reviewed in the same fashion as a major subdivision. That requires 2 public hearings, one at the planning board, which we are at tonight, another public hearing at the council of commissioners. This board will be asked to make a recommendation of approval with conditions or denial to the council commissioners, who will hold their own public hearing and make the final decision. Those, the council is required to adopt findings of fact for their reason for either approval with conditions, or denial. And those findings of fact have to be related to the review criteria outlined in the staff report.
Thank you for the reminder, Mr. McLeod. So in the staff report, so we have a recommendation, and the alternatives listed here is to deny, or recommend denial, recommend approval with alternatives, or continue the public hearing. So thank you for that. Any other questions of the board? Okay, seeing none. At this time, we'll ask the applicant to come up and say a few words if they wish. Sir, if you'd like to come up to the lectern there, turn on the microphone and state your name.
Hi, I'm Brian Stillagan, and I'm doing this subdivision, I guess what we call it, but all I wanted to do was give, I got 4 daughters, I wanted to give them a couple acres before I die. That's all it was about. I can see the concern on everybody, but I didn't have any intent of building and flipping houses or any of that kind of crap on this property. And I ain't got the luxury of having 200 acres. I got a little corner of the world, and I'd like to leave it to my 4 daughters. My one daughter, Tippett, she's already lives there. She got in a one-time deal, and to do this right, I had to do all this, spend all this money just so I can give them a couple acres, and I hope it goes through, but I'm asking the board, you know, there's no reason why 3 of my daughters don't even live in Butte. One's in Washington, 2 in Missoula. They're not even talking about building. I just want to leave it to them. I'm going to leave my house, just trying to get everything straight and ready before I go, and leave it to my kids. That's all.
Thank you. All right, at this time, we'll open the public hearing. We have received some letters here. The planning board has reviewed those letters. If you're present and would like to read your letter, that you are welcome to do so. Otherwise, we'll take note and it'll be part of the public record. So at this time, we'll make a call for proponents, those in favor of the subdivision. We'll do 3 calls for proponents, and then we'll do 3 calls for opponents, where you can give your statement if you're opposed. So for first call for proponents, those in favor of the subdivision. Okay.
Chad Ball, land surveyor, Brown and Associates, representing the developer in this. We surveyed this parcel this last summer. This was, I think it's just important for the board to know, and thank you, Chairman, and the board for listening to our proposal here. I think it's important to realize that this was a case of possibly some chronological misfortune. This parcel got subdivided, as Lila said, 20 years ago or so, and to create a parcel for the Stillwagon's daughter. That probably at that point could have been a family transfer for all 4 daughters. Now we're in this position of a subsequent minor subdivision to create these parcels for the other 3 daughters. This wouldn't even be at this point right now, had we just done a family split from the beginning, and we wouldn't have to go through subdivision regulations. And we, like I said, we wouldn't be listening to this proposal at this point. So I think it's important, as Brian said, this happens all over the county in areas just like this where we don't, you don't have to go through subdivision regulations to split up parcels for immediate family members. That is the case here. Parcels can be bought and sold, absolutely. Once these get split up, yeah. But the intention of what we're trying to do in the immediate future is to split up these parcels for the still wagons for daughters. Yeah, I guess that's all I really need to say. I think it was just important to let you guys know what the intention is here. And if you guys have any questions, I'll stay up here.
No questions. All right, second call for proponents. Third call for proponents. All right, at this time we'll take those opposed to the subdivision. So this is the first call for opponents. So if you'd like to speak, please come up, state your name. So there's a lot of people here, I'm assuming, to give public comment. I'd like to limit you to 3 minutes. I'll give you a wave at 2 minutes and 45 seconds and ask you to wrap up.
I do have a long letter to submit, and I'm not going to read that. I only have 3 minutes here, but what I would like
Sir,
to do
could you
is-
state your name?
Greg McGillen. I am a resident in the area. I would prefer if the planning board would not approve this subdivision, and my opposition is based on Montana Code annotated 2021, Title 76, Chapter 3, which is the Montana law governing, it's commonly known as the Montana Subdivision and Plating Act. And in there, I see that we have some problems. In Section 76.3, 603, with 3 I's after it, there is the need for a community impact report, the effect on the community out there. And they list some things out there that I'd like to address. The first one on the list is education and busing. Currently, Butte-Silver County, Butte-Silver School District number 1 does not provide direct bus support to this area. I was talking to Jeremy Whitlock, our transportation director. They pick up 7 students from this area in Rocker every day and deliver them back again. When all of us grew up, we had bus services. We do not provide bus services anymore. The second one is the roads. These are county roads. They are old roads. A lot of them, if through the pictures, have millings on them, but they're still county roads. They have sharp corners. The one in the picture, if you go forward a couple, you can see the sharp corner past that subdivision. 2 to 3 cars at least every year fly off of that right there, that corner you see where the road disappears, and destroys the fence. How we haven't had any fatalities on that, I don't know. The roads throughout this whole area are sloughing off on the sides. On the Browns Gulch Road, we had a truck laying in the ditch for a couple days. They've got pylons out there. They look like they're good roads, but they're old county roads. They are at their holding capacity for traffic. Fire protection is non-existent in the area. 45 years ago, the parents out there, the families out there got together to see if they could create a volunteer fire department. And they agreed that that was a good idea. Where we couldn't agree was where to put the pumper truck, because that's exactly what we need out there, and it has to have a heated garage. They have added some services there with some holding tanks, but they're on the Browns Gulch side. Anything that catches on fire in this area burns to the ground. If trucks do get there and can find their way, that's been a problem. They run out of water, and it's a long haul to get water back in there. Law enforcement services, we are lacking in Silver Bow County as a whole. We have trouble with police officers finding them, and we don't have that. I had to call the police last year. I had a threat to one of my family members. They knew it was an emergency. It took the 2
Sir,
police
wrap up.
cars an hour and a half to arrive. Can I just finish with one thing? So I don't believe that we're providing the services necessary at the county level to support any subdivision, this one or anyone. And Montana law is very clear on this, that if we're going to add subdivisions, it cannot be a burden on our public funds to the supply of these services. So if we're going to improve our roads, if we're going to add our school district services, if we're going to put a fire station out there, whatever we need to do, it can't be a burden on the rest of the county. And I don't think that that's possible in today's budgetary age of
Sir, we'll
no
have to
money,
ask you to
no
wrap it up.
funds for anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGillen. First call for opponents.
Good evening. My name is Joan Duhame. I'm part of the Duhame Brothers. We have property on Browns Gulch and Hale Columbia Gulch. We border this piece of land on the north and the east side. And I want to do a little bit of history, which comes with age at times. It's very important. But in the 1960s, Savanios went out to the 9 Mile and bought the St. Ange place. They proceeded to divide it up into very small parcels, and they did this over a period of time. And when they were doing this, there was no regard for the environment. There was no regard for the ecosystem. There was no regard for the groundwater. There was no ground for the land drainage. Eventually, it hurt each other's neighbors. I know this because I traveled the Janey Road, which goes up in the middle of Terra Verde Heights right now, every summer and fall and part of the spring, because we pastured our horses at the top of the mountain. I systematically watched the destruction of the environment. I saw how the house on top of house was creating water pollution, creating drainage problems, creating an ecosystem that was not subsistent with the area, and it was downright saddening. So this is the reasoning, was not too long after this, within a year or two, that the 40-acre parcel was passed into ordinance in Silver County to try to alleviate this kind of destruction. And so here we are, my life 60 or 50 years later, and it's starting to happen again. You as people have been elected by the people and the voters to uphold the ordinances that are on the books. And it's hard to say, but there's a hell of a lot of difference between 40 acres and 2.5+ acres. Because we border on that, the groundwater that comes off of, because they're on the side of a hill, goes down into our meadow. And we haven't done any surveying, but I'm sure that there's pollution. I'm sure there's destruction to the ecosystem. I'm sure there's underground water problems. But we let it be. So as to honor the property rights of the people who travel Hale Columbia Gulch, Sheep Gulch, and other gulches in the area, please uphold the laws. That's why it was passed in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you. First call for opponents.
Do I have to press this or something? I just want to respond to
Miss,
this.
can you state your
Chris-
name and step up to the mic?
My name is Chris Duhame. I'm an adjacent landowner. And I just want to respond to this contention that what Brian's good intentions are, that there won't be any houses built on it, and he just wants to leave it to his kids. But most of them don't even live here. Well, you're just making my argument for me, which is that it's probably going to get sold to somebody else that will build a house there. And then we've just got more people and more dogs and more traffic and more garbage, and we don't need any of it.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Jeff Hockaday. Me and my wife, lovely wife Dorothy, live to the south of this proposed subdivision. And we're against it because we worked with the DNRC for 5 years doing this tree project, restoring the top of our mountain to its original, I mean, what it's always been like. We have huge amounts of bitterroot flowers, all the non-indigenous, or, you know, the invasive species have been removed. There's no knapweed, not a single plant. And it's where the deer have their babies and live up there. We like that. We like seeing them. We like a little safe haven for them. The more people that are in that area, it means, you know, who knows what their lives there will be like, the environment. And the natural, the way of the water, we did this because of the watershed. The trees, I want to say cedars, but they're actually a juniper tree. There's like a lot of water. That water goes down into the creek that she was talking about, and it feeds a stream which has one of the last places that I know of cutthroat trout. And those cutthroat trout are in the Browns Gulch Creek and in the creek that goes up Hale Columbia Gulch. They don't go up as far as they do in the Browns Gulch Creek, but that creek, those trout go all the way to the top. And it's still nice in the summertime. You can go down there and catch some, you wouldn't believe the nice fish that are there due to the land, people taking care of the land out there. That's just part of the deal when you live out there. You take care of everything in your neighbor's stuff. You make sure, you know, everything's good. And we worked really hard to make that really good. That was a gift from my wife's mom, gave us the property that we could build a house on and raise. We've been fortunate enough to raise our kids out there, and then they move out and move away. And it's just, I'd hate to see the place change. You know, everything and then the wells get drilled, the septic tanks and the everything, and then affect that. You lose just a little bit, like, well, who cares about the cutthroat trout? Well, I care. You lose that. It was under our watch and all these other people out here that those trout stayed safe all these years. Now, and I'm not saying maybe they would stay safe with that subdivision. I don't know, but I don't want to take the chance. So that we're going no on this, and that's where we're at with it.
If you could wrap it up.
Huh?
If you could wrap it up. You're at 2:50.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hockaday.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Marilyn Malavac. I actually my property borders the property for the subdivision on the other side of the big hill. And that road that they have going in actually wraps around to several of the neighbors onto my property. So what I'd like to focus on, one, is traffic. I already have kind of an issue with all of the traffic that's on the main road of Browns Gulch and Hale Columbia. They are rather narrow roads, being that they are rural, and I've had near misses of head-ons. People come flying into the gulch, and you've got to be really careful to make sure to pay attention that somebody doesn't hit you head-on because of the road narrowing as you're going out. They don't pay attention to the speed limit, which is 25. They drive like crazy. I hate to see a lot more traffic continue to go in. Plus, there's National Forest Service up there, so we have recreationalists that are out there in addition. And to start adding homes, I can sympathize with the still wagons because I feel their pain of leaving things for their children. I've gone through kind of the same thoughts right now. I've created a will of what am I going to do with my children and my property. And I never thought once of breaking it up into pieces, because I hope that my children are adult enough to come up with a solution of, well, I'm going to build here and you can build there and we'll live in harmony. That's the way Mom and Dad taught us to live, is to be kind to one another. Plus, you already have houses there. Hopefully, one or two of them might take those houses. Just try to keep it as natural as possible. It's some of the last pieces of the beautiful property that we have around Butte. And really, honestly, I feel for both of you. I do. And I wish there was a better answer to this whole situation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Kurt Hansen, and I live out in Browns Gulch, and we have property adjacent to the proposed subdivision here. Brian says he wants to leave it for his children, and you know, that's a noble and nice thing to do, but anybody in real estate knows death, disease, and divorce, everything changes. We think we have a lid on the future. We don't. Nobody knows who's going to end up here. There is no zoning presently, so I don't know what could be done with these parcels. If you look at it, that what looks to be the brown area, that is pasture and a hay meadow. And you can see that we have built nothing there. There's no barns, there's no sheds. We're trying to be as nice to our neighbors as we can. There's no corrals there, they're down further. We try and get along with these people, but you know, they need to show us a little bit of compassion too. And I'm not saying something's going to get built there, but I mean, they wouldn't be happy if we did that. And that's kind of my thoughts on it. The property looks pretty flat in the picture. If you were to look at it, and even a photograph doesn't do much. You know, when you stand out there and have to walk up the hill, you start to realize the slope that is there. I don't know where you'd build a home if you would go further down, close to the road. It's, and the drive for the lot that would be in between where the two homes are now would be up that hill, and you'd have to cut in to that slope. And I mean, people will build a home wherever they can nowadays. I realize land's very expensive and they just don't have a lot of options, but it's probably not the best building site. And if his children aren't here, they may just want to sell what he has. I don't know, you know. I'm not his estate planner, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hansen.
My name is Peter Dalsair. I'm a landowner in Browns Gulch, and I do some of the ranching and farming near and with the Duhaimes. And some of my concerns are is like what's happening in Bozeman, you know, and what happened west of town. And, you know, sometimes we have to be out there with the cows at night and doing things, and they make noise, and we're out there farming or baling hay at night. And there's actually problems in Bozeman, and you guys would know better than me, in places that turn into little subdivisions. And this becomes the start of what goes on. I mean, I'm out there every day. I live there like these folks do, and I'm there every day. And the problem I have is one little subdivision here, one little subdivision there. Pretty soon, you know, they don't like that I'm baling hay at night. They don't like that I'm plowing it. They don't like my cows because I wean their calves and they're running around. And it's getting harder to do business everywhere. I mean, most of these people don't even like me because of my cows, you know what I mean? And it's one of those things, but it's cows or condos, folks, and right now we'd rather do some cows, and I think that's where I stand with this thing. Is it's nothing against Brian and his kids, and it's like all of us go to work every day and do what we ever have to do, you know, and it's like You know, I mean, I bet there's a lot of people that would like to buy Brian's little piece of the world, and maybe could get one of these subdivisions where he could have 4 pieces of ground that were awesome, and I don't know what that would be for him, you know what I mean? But I just think there's a lot of options out there that we have to look for our own family, you know? I'm one of those guys that got divorced and had to buy my house again, you know? It's one of those things you have to deal with and live with, and I've seen a lot of good things in Browns Gulch happen with these things, and I've seen a lot of bad things, and we all have to deal with them. But as a business person, we're still an ag community out there. You know, you got the Pizzolas, you got the Dallaseras, you got the Valentines, you got the Duhaimes, you got, you know, they're all still ranching. So until we turn it into more of a these little places of building houses like south of town you don't have anymore. And I guess that's my fear. Someday it might have to happen. I don't know. But that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dallasera.
Hello, my name is Dorothy Hockaday, and I also did turn in a statement. But I wanted to say this will be in my backyard, and we are on a hill. So excess, they're going to drill wells and have septic tanks, and I'm downhill from that, and that could affect my well. So I'm glad that the DEQ is going to look into all that, because if my well goes dry, who do I go to? Then I've been out there for 30 years. I grew up out there. I actually been out there my whole life. But I built my house 30 years ago on the hill, Columbia Gulch Road. It is a hill, so in the winter it's ice. It takes them a while to get out there to sand it, anything like that. There's always accidents. At the bottom of the hill, people always go through my brother's fence. Every year there's several. He's up fixing fence all the time. It's just, you know, we're a rural area. It's like taking a neighborhood and plopping it out in the middle of a rural area. And a lot of people aren't used to that sort of life. They might think that they want it at first, but then maybe it'll be a hassle for them to drive in and out of town, you know, to work and all that every day. It's something that we grew up with. We like it. It's a peaceful area. They added noise, traffic, effect on the wildlife, and the watershed. It's going to make a huge difference. They might not think it will, but it will. And I'm hoping, I have 3 kids too, and I had 21 acres from my mom. That we had 8 kids in my family, and they gave everybody some land. And I'm hoping that my kids, somebody will move into my house that I have now when I'm gone. And if somebody else wants to build out there, that they would have a spot to do that. But I'm sure that not all 3 of them are going to want to live out there. But I'd like to have that as an option for them and not have a subdivision in their backyard, because that's part of the charm of living out there and the privilege to live out there, where it's peaceful, it's rural, and you don't have a neighbor right there looking down on you, on your property and what you're doing. And, you know, we just want privacy, and that's important. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms. Hockaday.
All right, I'm Hugh Murphy. I live to the
Sir, if you
west.
could state your name.
I'm Hugh Murphy.
Oh, excuse me.
I live to the west of Brian's land, right, my land borders theirs somewhat on top. I understand what Brian's saying. I mean, we all have kids and that. We all leave stuff too. I wish it could have been just a simple family transfer. I understand there's issues with that. I agree with all the environmental and watershed issues brought up. I think they're good concerns. I hope the planning board takes into account. I think my real issue is with the precedence that's going to be set. And if you approve this one, like I said, I understand what Brian's saying, but if you approve this one, then how are you going to deny the next one, which meet the criteria, and the next one, the next one? And pretty soon you're going to be breaking down to acre parcels and half-acre parcels and even less than that. So there's no, once you start the precedence, it's hard to stop. I think that's why you're seeing all these people here, is nobody wants to see that happen. So, you know, my issue, of course, not with the steel wagons. We've lived next to them for, you know, I'm 60 years old my whole life. So they're great people, but we don't want the precedents, and I understand, like I said, this specific subdivision, the concerns coming from the neighbors. So that's why I'm standing up here in opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. All right, we'll do a second call for opponents. All right, last call for opponents. All right. All right. The applicant, if you'd like to address any of those concerns quickly. If not, we can move on. Okay. All right, we'll close this portion of the meeting, public portion of the meeting, open it up to board discussion and potentially a vote. Does anyone have any initial reactions? Mr. McLeod.
I don't have them in front of me. Could you review those conditions of the staff report? Thank you. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, would it be helpful if I read them aloud?
Yes, please.
Staff has recommended 10 conditions. First, the preliminary plat is good for 3 years. At the end of this period, the governing body may extend the time frame. That's referring to the process of subdivision, which first is a preliminary plat, and then afterwards is a final plat. Between preliminary plat and final plat is when the applicant has the chance to meet all conditions, and if they don't meet all conditions, then final plat would not be awarded and the subdivision wouldn't happen. Number 2, the final plat shall conform to the requirements of the Butte-Silver subdivision regulations and of the Montana Subdivision and Platting Act. This includes certification by the treasurer that taxes are paid and current. 3, all septic, well, and stormwater installation plans shall obtain the required permits and approvals prior to submitting the final plat. In this instance, that would be approval from the Department of Environmental Quality. 4, addresses would be assigned to new lots by the planning department at the time an individual lot owner applies for a building permit. 5, prior to applying for a final plat, the applicant shall submit the required documentation for review and secure written approval from the Silver Bow Public Works Department for the installation of a stop sign at the corner of Hale Columbia Gulch and that other road, which would be named Thunderbolt Gulch Road. 6, the applicant shall be required to secure all applicable permits that may be necessary to make improvements in or near designated wetlands or surface water bodies, including but not limited to stormwater discharge construction permit from the DEQ, a floodplain development permit from Butte-Silver, a 310 permit, which is stream bed and land preservation from the Mile High Conservation District, and a 404 permit, Clean Water Act from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. 7, each future residence shall be required to install a residential fire sprinkler system at the time of construction to meet the requirements of Appendix A fire standards of the subdivision regs. 8, each new lot shall construct proper approaches and obtain proper approach permits from the Butte-Silver Public Works Department at the time of development. 9, as required by the subdivision regulations, a weed control plan shall be approved by the weed board prior to filing final plat, and it must be bonded for. 10, the road name for the existing roadway north of the subdivision shall be included on the final plat as Thunderbolt Gulch Road.
Thank you, Ms. Osborne. So to planning staff, just to confirm, the recommendation is approval based on the criteria of agriculture, local services, natural environment, wildlife, and then public health and safety.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct, and that's what's outlined in the Montana Subdivision and Plating Act as well.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify too, so the process of when staff reviews this subdivision, we have a subdivision review meeting that contains all stakeholders. We invite all stakeholders such as utility companies, Fish, Wildlife and Parks, Northwestern Energy, school districts and all that. And we take any comment received. Sometimes we don't get a lot of, or every of those agencies don't always attend, but the comments received during that subdivision review meeting are also in your staff report. And that's what staff utilizes to determine if it meets the criteria, such as effects on agriculture, local services, and things like that. So those comments received from those agencies that have those specific purview is what staff utilizes to determine the recommendation in the staff report. In part, yes.
So I guess just for other members, I guess when we're thinking about this, if they're if they're not meeting any of these conditions, I guess my initial feeling is to go with the recommendation of they're meeting their criteria. I guess, I don't know, does anyone have a different opinion? Mr. McLeod.
I'll preface it by this is my opinion, okay? So this is the second stint I've been on the planning board, and I honestly don't know, albeit it's a minor subdivision, that I've had a tougher one that I've seen. And it's easy to say, but I think for lack of a better term, we're gonna, one way or the other, kind of kick the can down the road to the council because they're gonna make the ultimate decision. Obviously, being in the business that I'm in, I'm all about property rights, and I look at the conditions, and I think those conditions can be easily met. My personal opinion is not speaking on behalf of the board, is I've been up there a lot, and it just doesn't fit, right, to me. But I think that's my opinion, but the reality is I think our job as this board is to make a recommendation, pass it along, and ultimately let the council make the decision. I'm not an attorney, but I don't see where we could legally deny this or not recommend it. But I will say, I think that for the folks that are out there, the council, they'll make a decision, and a lot of times they make decisions that you may agree or disagree with, but they'll make them based on how I think they feel. And I know they won't admit that, but I think that's what it comes down to a lot of times. So I think ultimately that's where it's got to go. I would make a recommendation that we recommend approval of this, subject to the conditions as proposed by the staff. Make that recommendation to the council, let them ultimately decide what to do.
Make a motion for recommendation.
Yes, with conditions.
With the conditions as outlined in the report.
Let me say something first.
Yeah, Mr. Riley.
Okay. A lot of these letters here have a thing that says long-time zonings and 40-acre rules. That's not a rule, right? That a house has to be on 40 acres? Just so everybody's clear on.
Mr. Pipinich.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Riley, so the area is unzoned. There are no zoning restrictions. Zoning is the regulatory document that would force that. The 2008 growth policy and possibly earlier, the future land use designation for this area was RD 40, which is rural development 40 with a suggestion of 40 acres. That was not a regulatory document. That was the future vision for the area. The 2020 comprehensive plan replaced that RD40 in this area with working lands, and we described the kind of the place type for working lands. It doesn't necessarily have an acreage type, but it's geared towards more farming ag activities than development. So those are recommendations from the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is something that is considered during subdivision review at the planning board level. It is not something that is regulatory or an ordinance.
Okay, thank you. But, so my opinion, if you go back to the comprehensive plan of 2020, this was set up to be more working lands. So in my opinion, like Mike said, that doesn't fit with this area. Because then if the next one does it, then pretty soon you can have 1 acre, 2 acre deals all over, and that's not the area that this fits. But I look at it as the comprehensive plan, that it was working lands.
Can I say something?
Thanks, something. Ms. DeShay.
I also agree. If this was set up as working lands, that subdivision does not fit. So I don't know what we can do about that because there's nothing regulatory that can be done, right, in this situation.
Mr. Pipinich.
Mr. Steitzer, members of the board, so how the board is asked to view the comprehensive plan is how that plan and that place type is reflected in the review criteria. So the board, knowing that the future land use goal is the working lands place type, and if this does not meet that, how does that affect agricultural users? How does that affect local services? How does that affect those actual review criteria? So that's how evaluating the comprehensive plan comes into subdivision review, is knowing that future mindset or that future place type, how, if this is different than that place type itself, how it affects those services. I would also like to state that the board must keep in mind that there are other areas of the comprehensive plan, because the map says that this is working lands. There are also broader community goals in that comprehensive plan that also should be considered when you're evaluating those effects on services. You know, one being the need for housing, things like that. I mean, this board was the board that steered that comprehensive plan. Most of you are on the board, so you understand what those broader community goals and objectives are as well. Those also come into play.
Mr. Rory.
Directed to Mr. Pipinich. Is there anything in the future, in terms of the way we're set up to do business out there zoning-wise, that would worst case scenario, I think, for these folks here that are opponents, that one of those children sells the lot, okay, the land, not the lot, the land, excuse me. Is there anything to prohibit either Mr. Stillwagon's children, or if they were to sell their tract of land to another outside buyer from wherever they come from and chop it up even further into smaller parcels? Is there anything set up zoning-wise that would prohibit that type of situation, exacerbating what they already see as a problem? Is there a mechanism in place that could curtail that?
Mr. Pipinich.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, so the specific answer to your question about zoning is no. The land is unzoned. There are regulations for subdivision. I mean, that's why we're here. Any future subdivision would have to meet the same criteria that this one would. Smaller lots have bigger impact, obviously. Probably the largest hurdle for that would be well and septic review through the Department of Environmental Quality. There's offset requirements from property lines, and you need a certain amount of acreage to discharge your septic system into. But specifically to your question, the area is unzoned and there are no zoning restrictions.
Thank you, that answers my question.
Can I make a quick comment?
Mr. Garf.
It may have been in your slideshow, or it may just be in our packet, but the surveyor went through and put the septic systems and the fields on the parcels, and they take up a lot of space. So to your comment, I think it would be fairly difficult to subdivide the parcels even further, just because of how large the septic requirements are now. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Not impossible, but difficult.
All right, so I think we have a motion on the table to recommend approval, unless there's any other discussion. Okay, so I will second that motion. So this time we're voting to recommend approval to the council commissioners to make a decision from there. So all those in favor of the motion to recommend approval, say aye. Aye. So we got Ms. DeShay. I'm sorry. Degra. All those opposed? Okay. So the motion carries 4-2. So the motion passes. So for folks, obviously, that were opponents to this, there will be a second hearing at the Council of Commissioners in several weeks' time. I'm sure Mr. Pipinich can give us a more exact date. And at that time, you can bring these concerns to them again.
Mr. Chairman, the public hearing will be advertised in the same fashion that this one was. It'll be in the newspaper, and there will be a sign and letters, and the neighboring property owners will receive letters to that date of that hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Pipinich. Okay. All right. So with that, we're moving on from this agenda item. Thank you, folks, for coming out. So, sir, we're still in the middle of the meeting. We got 3 more agenda items here. So if you could hang around till the end of the meeting or talk to the planning staff during the regular business hours. Thank you. Thanks, sir. Sorry. Thank you. Ms. Burns, thanks for hanging in there. All right, the next item on the agenda tonight is the amendment to the Uptown Butte Urban Renewal District Review. Butte-Silver is required to submit changes to an urban renewal project plan to the planning board for review and recommendations as to its conformity with pertinent sections of the adopted comprehensive plan and zoning. At this time, we'll take a staff review.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. These are briefer, and I assume Karen and Kristen will give you a little more information, and Pauline. The Uptown Butte Urban Renewal District, this proposal is to amend it, and it's the same process to amend it as it is to adopt it, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Some background. This district was created in 2014 to revitalize the CBD and surrounding. CBD is the Central Business District and the surrounding neighborhoods uptown. The Uptown URD Board decided recently to expand the district boundaries to address additional blighted areas, and that's the purpose of URDs is to address blight. The stated goals of the URD Uptown are to promote compatible land use and human-scale urban design, improve, maintain, and upgrade the public infrastructure, promote economic development, support the stabilization, preservation, and rehabilitation of historic structures in the urban renewal area, and foster neighborhood revitalization and rehab. So the gray is the current district, the purple is the proposed district. Mostly the proposed addition, sorry, it would be all of it if it was adopted. It's mostly residential areas and some reclamation sites and a couple businesses as well. So these are the 7 comprehensive plan core objectives, which I think I've read to you many, many times. I don't know if you want me to read them again. But my point being is that the proposed expansion of the URD further many, if not all, of these core objectives of the comprehensive plan. So when comparing the objectives of the URD and the comprehensive plan, we do believe that they mesh. The URD represents actionable funding efforts to implement many of the goals and strategies that our comprehensive plan identifies. When we review the place types, we have 3 place types in the proposed expansion area. That's open lands. Most of these are reclamation sites, and there's like the Uptown Trail, some old mining areas. Those are just designated open lands, and they're very limited for development. The Uptown neighborhood are a lot of those residential neighborhoods uptown. And the Uptown edge is residential and some businesses as well. Zoning review in this area, the existing zoning districts are primary, commercial, residential, and open space, very similarly aligned with the comprehensive plan place types. These districts and the uses allowed within them are substantially compatible with the comp plan and the goals of the expanded URD. Should the board find that the design and the goals of this amendment to the URD be in substantial conformance with the comp plan and zoning, they may recommend such conclusions to the Council of Commissioners.
Any questions from staff on this amendment of the URD?
I have a question.
Mr. Garf.
I think in some of the preliminary discussions of expanding this designation to more parts of Butte, and by the way, I'm in favor of this, I'm just curious. I think one of the recommendations was to expand it west along Park all the way to Tech, but then I see that that's not included here. I'm just curious why that was excluded.
Ms. Osborne.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Garf, that may be better answered by Karen Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Karen Burns, Director of Community Development. To answer Mr. Garf's question, when you're looking at expanding boundaries, you have to be really thoughtful about how you do that. So if we were to expand a boundary to include Park Street, you have to draw a boundary along a parcel line or a boundary line. You can't split parcels. So to make that connection, to draw that line, you would have to choose to go down an alley or just make a thin. To include all of it, it would really be difficult to draw a boundary that's impactful. So it's a tough situation. You do a lot of thinking, a lot of balancing back and forth of where it should be and how it should look. We did consider it. It was very difficult to draw a meaningful boundary that extended all the way over to Montana Tech and then took in some of the other developable properties that are in the purple to the north that we thought we could make a really big impact on with this expansion, especially looking at some of the parcel sizes and the surveying that needs to be done to create developable parcels within our urban core to possibly create additional housing in this area. So that was one of the considerations that we made. We did hold some public meetings to ask for input on the boundary, and we never did receive anything in in a negative way towards this boundary that we're presenting to you today. I hope I answered the question, just sort of talked around it.
Oh, you answered it. Thank
Okay,
you so
thank
much.
you.
Any other questions from the board? So, Ms. Osborne, are you looking for a recommendation of these as well? I see it says in 60 days.
Maybe. Oh, it does say in 60 days, yeah.
Yeah, the required planning board action says review recommendations must be made to the council of commissioners within 60 days of receipt.
So the goal here is that the board make findings that the plan is in compliance with the comprehensive plan and zoning, that they're all three mesh. So staff is actually, if that is the case and the board votes that way, you would create a document stating that fact, you know, whereas you had this meeting on such and such date, reviewed this plan submitted by, that the planning board finds that the proposal is in substantial compliance with the adopted comprehensive plan and zoning. Does that make sense? So what is asked of you is if the plan proposed by the Economic Development Office is in substantial compliance with the comprehensive plan and zoning. Yes.
So I'm not clear
so
on this.
You're not making are they making a recommendation to council? Here,
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, so you're recommending findings. Hypothetically, your recommendation could be that the planning board finds that the proposed URD expansion is in compliance with the comprehensive plan and zoning.
Thanks, but in your staff report, you haven't suggested either way. Is that right? I don't think I've seen that.
That's correct. We didn't make a recommendation either way. We just presented the facts, and then you would make the recommendation to council.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Burns, did you have a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just thought I should clarify. So when you look at expanding a district or creating a new district, it's one of the requirements that we need to submit to the Department of Revenue with all of our documentation to do this action with our districts, that the planning board has found that, you know, we are in compliance with the comprehensive plan and zoning with our proposed changes. So that's one piece of documentation that we do need from this body, recommended to the council, them concurring with that, and then we have to submit that with all of our paperwork and documentation to the Department of Revenue.
I see, okay.
So we need your help, thank you.
So I guess tonight, though, we're still not recommending. You still need like some sort of formal review of this with a document.
Mr. Chairman, you could recommend that the URD is in compliance or is not in compliance with comprehensive plan and zoning, and then we would get you a list of findings that we would then send to the council should you want to sign it.
Okay, Mr. Pipinich.
Mr. Chairman, we are looking for a recommendation tonight.
Okay.
Should this board find that that is the case, then the chair of the board would draft the statement of findings with help of staff to submit to council.
Great, okay. Mr. McLeod.
I think this is one where we're going to, at least personally, I'm going to rely solely on the staff. You know, I assume it's in compliance. I can, you know, so I think this would be one, and I just make a suggestion, but however you want to follow it. Do we have to hit each one before we vote, or can we go through all of them and then make a vote on all of them collectively?
You're talking about the other three?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're each individual applications.
Okay. I just, from a person, unless somebody else has an opinion, I just think that this is, for one thing, that we definitely have to rely on them if it's in compliance or not, because I don't think I'm going to be able to go through and go, well, part of it isn't because, or what have you. So just my 2 cents.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. McLeod, Just to clarify, during the presentation, Lila did state that it is in compliance with the.
Okay, Mr. Rory.
Ms. Bird says that it's in compliance, correct? That's what you just said just now, right?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ori, right, I said that during the staff presentation and in the staff report, planning staff has found that it is in compliance.
And your office concurs with that?
That is where the recommendation came from. Lila has found that it is in compliance, not Ms. Burns.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay. So I think we can make a motion to recommend expansion of the boundary to the council commissioners.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. Moving on to the third item, the South Butte Targeted Economic Development District Review. Butte-Silver is required to submit an urban review project plan to the planning board for review and recommendations as to its conformity with the pertinent sections of the adopted comprehensive plan and zoning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. This one's a little bit less straightforward, but we'll talk about it. A little bit of background. The South Butte TED, it's also an expansion. The South Butte TED was created in 2016. The requested expansion now is to encompass some additional industrial land that lacks infrastructure. The comprehensive plan and zoning in this area were amended in 2022. Some of you might remember those proposals to expand the industrial area, the industrially zoned area south. So that's these blue hashed areas. They used to be working lands and residentially zoned. They are now economic driver place type and industrially zoned. TED districts, targeted economic development districts, must take in complete parcels. They cannot take in a portion of a parcel. So when we reviewed this zone change and comprehensive plan amendment, it wasn't the entire parcel, it was only a portion of it. So the purple is the proposed expansion, and it goes by parcel. So it's the entire parcel, whereas when we did the amendment, nothing south of Basin Creek was changed, if that makes sense. Basically, Basin Creek was left as the buffer between residential and industrial. These are the same core objectives. The goals of the South Butte TED primarily further goals number 1, 2, 5, and 6. The others would not necessarily be supported, but would probably not be impeded by the continuation of the TED in this area. For the place type review, there is economic driver, and here you can more clearly see that Basin Creek is the barrier between residential place types and industrial place types. The economic driver is that dark blue, and the two greens are residential, rural residential, and working lands. The economic driver primarily encompasses the existing South Butte TED and then some of that land that is zoned industrially, but that lacks infrastructure. While the economic driver is in conformance with the goals, the rural residential and working lands are not necessarily in conformance with the goals. Zoning review, the boundaries are the same for the comprehensive plan and the zoning districts, except that the zoning is all residential, there's no working lands zoning. So the purple is industrial and the yellow is residential. Same conclusions as the previous presentation. Should the board find the design and goals of the South Butte Targeted Economic Development Districts to be in substantial conformance with the comprehensive plan and zoning, they may recommend such to the council.
Any questions from the board?
I have a question.
Mr. Garf.
So just to clarify, that large parcel, that's a single parcel that crosses Basin Creek, and that's why the boundary extends past Basin Creek?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Garf, that's correct. I think there are two little triangular parcels also included here, but this is one big parcel with two different zoning designations on it.
Okay, and you have to include whole parcels. I think you said that earlier.
For a TED district, you have to take in the entire parcel.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess based on the core objectives, meeting 1, 2, 3, and 5 of the 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6 of the comprehensive plan, I would recommend expanding of the district. Make a motion to recommend expanding of the district.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. All right, final agenda item, the Montana Connections Targeted Economic Development District Review. Butte-Silver is required to submit an urban review project plan to the planning board for review and recommendations as to its conformity with the pertinent sections of the adopted comprehensive plan and zoning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. The TIFID, or sometimes called the Montana Connections Business Development Park, was created in 1992, and it recently sunsetted in June of last year. So the TIFID TED district is not active anymore, and this proposal is to reactivate it. Create a new one. It's approximately 3,000 acres, and the base year would be January 1 of 2023. TIFIDs, or TED districts, are created to address infrastructure deficiencies, and the ones identified in this area are roads, rail, internet fiber, potable water, industrial water, and electric and gas utilities. This is the proposed area. And this is creating a whole new one. So the old one sunsetted, and this is a new one. This is the same as the last presentation, except the core objectives addressed are 1, 2, 5, and 6. Place type review, the place types that are encompassed in the boundary of the proposed TED is the economic driver and a little bit of open lands. The economic driver mostly encompasses the Montana Connections Business Development Park in the area. There's a small section of open land across I-15 over here. And both of these place types are in accordance with the proposed TED. Zoning, the only zoning district in the proposed area is the RM2, which is our rural industrial district. The rest of the land that isn't zoned RM2 is not zoned at all. Therefore, the zoning in the proposed district is in conformance with the comprehensive plan and the TED. And that is the same conclusion as before.
Any questions of the board? All right, given that creating of the Montana Connections TED satisfies or promotes the objectives of the comprehensive plan 1, 2, 5, and 6, recommend approval to the Council of Commissioners.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. All right, thank you.
I have a,
Yeah, we're on to other business.
okay. I don't recall Lila or Mr. Pipinich looking quite as jovial, happy, giddy than I did tonight, and I'm just assuming there's something they probably want to tell us, and since, you know, the word's out, so if you'd like to share any news, either one of you with the board, that'd be terrific.
Well, I'm assuming that most of you, well, I guess not everybody gets the Montana Standard anymore. But, yep, I've taken a job and will be moving on. This is my last board meeting. Lila is also moving on the first part of November. So you will have a brand new planning department other than Joella at your next 2 meetings from now. Probably in November.
May I say something? You're a lot younger than me, right? You really think that
At least I
Montana
look like it.
Standard's the first time I heard that you two are leaving? But I will say, prior to your confusion, thank you very much for your time, both of you, that you've put in here. And Mr. Pipinich and I have disagreed on a number of things, but I hope he doesn't confuse that with my dislike, because I certainly like them. And Lila, you've both been very professional. We appreciate your time. From my point of view, Mr. Ori probably disagrees,
No,
but
I totally agree. Totally.
Yeah.
Wonderful job you guys have done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys for sure. All right. Any public comment on something not on tonight's agenda?
I'm just waiting for Mr. Dalsar to leave so I can leave. I'm not going anywhere till he's.
All right. All right, we'll adjourn this meeting.